Eden 3 had always been quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of peaceful world where children played in open fields and old men watched twin moons rise over silver lakes. A world where humans finally felt safe enough to build homes without walls, streets without patrols, cities without fear. Because everyone believed the age of war was over, believed the galaxy had learned its lesson, believed violence was a thing of the past. So the colony lived with open doors and soft hearts, planting gardens. Instead of defenses, building schools instead of bunkers, trusting the stars instead of fearing them, and for decades the silence felt like a blessing, like a promise that humanity had finally found a corner of the universe where nothing could hurt them, nothing could chase them, nothing could take from them ever again, and parents tucked their children into bed whispering, "The galaxy is peaceful now." And they believed it, truly believed it, because no enemy had appeared for years, no threat, no warning, nothing but gentle winds and calm skies, until one night everything changed in a single heartbeat when the calm sky over Eden 3 suddenly flickered with strange red light. A color no one had ever seen before, a burning stain spreading across the stars like spilled blood, and people stepped out of their homes confused, frightened, staring upward as the red glow grew brighter and brighter until the stars themselves disappeared behind it. And then the ground shook, just once, a deep, trembling rumble that seemed to rise from the core of the planet. And in that trembling moment every human on Eden 3 felt something in their chest. A cold, sharp instinct they didn't recognize anymore. Fear, real fear, ancient fear. The kind humanity thought it had left behind. And as they stared up, shapes emerged from the red sky, dark metallic shadows, hundreds of them, growing larger, descending, blocking out the moons, blocking out the light. And gasps turned to screams as the truth became clear. These were not meteor storms, not atmospheric storms, but warships, massive alien warships belonging to a species the colony barely remembered. A name buried in old history files. The Dravix Dominion. A race known once for conquest, believed extinct, believed defeated, believed gone forever, and yet here they were, engines burning blood red, formations tight and predatory, their arrival so sudden, so merciless, that not a single human on Eden 3 had time to run, to hide, to understand. Because the Dravix did not send a warning, did not send a message, did not ask for surrender, they opened fire. The first blast was silent for a split second, a bright beam tearing through the clouds before the sound caught up, a roaring explosion that shook the atmosphere and lit the night like sunrise, ripping apart a whole district in an instant, turning homes, streets, families into ashen shadows, and the fire spread so fast it felt alive, climbing buildings, swallowing air, turning screams into echoes, and panic erupted across the colony. People running in every direction though there was nowhere to go, mothers dragging children, fathers shouting for loved ones, alarms wailing through the streets for the first time in the colony's history. Alarms that had never been tested, never been needed, because Eden 3 wasn't built for war, wasn't prepared, wasn't armed, and as the next wave of blasts struck, entire cities fell, towers collapsing like sandcastles, roads splitting, lakes boiling under the heat of plasma fire. And through the chaos a transmission station desperately activated. Its operators shaking, crying, voices cracking as they sent a message across space. A message not filled with threats or anger or military codes, but a simple desperate truth spoken through tears. We are civilians. We are unarmed. That message, raw and trembling, echoed through the void, carried by broken voices holding on to one last hope. That mercy still existed somewhere out there. But deep in the warships, the Dravix commanders laughed, cold and merciless, declaring humans too many, too fast, too dangerous in the future. And with ruthless satisfaction they ordered the total cleansing of Eden 3, their voices calm as they damned millions to death. And the bombardment continued, relentless, merciless, until forests became charcoal, oceans steamed, and every corner of the once peaceful world glowed with flames that reached for the stars. In the final minutes, as oxygen thinned and the sky turned black with smoke, a small group of surviving technicians huddled around a failing transmitter, their faces streaked with soot and tears, their hands shaking as they tried to send one last signal, not a call for revenge, not a threat, but a final statement to anyone listening. There are no soldiers here, only families. And then the signal cut, the screens went dark, and Eden 3 fell silent forever. A silent grave of ash drifting beneath. A sky full of enemy warships. When the message reached Earth hours later, the command centers fell into stunned silence, officers staring at the words on their screens, unable to speak, unable to breathe, the horror sinking in slowly. An entire human world gone, destroyed without cause, without warning, without a single weapon raised in defense. And across the galaxy the news spread like wildfire, alien diplomats and governments whispering with mocking smiles that humans were finished, that humanity was weak, that Earth would surely hide, surely surrender, surely beg for mercy, because humanity had no great armies, no massive fleets, no legendary weapons, not anymore, not that anyone knew about, and laughter echoed across star councils as they declared humans a dead species walking. But what the galaxy didn't know, what no alien had ever guessed, was that Earth wasn't stunned into silence. Earth was holding its breath. Because deep beneath the calm oceans, under layers of metal and stone, in chambers no alien spy had ever found, an ancient signal woke up for the first time in centuries. A coded message pulsing through buried networks, activating old systems, lighting up forgotten consoles, and in the shadows of Earth's deepest command vault, a single phrase appeared in burning red letters: Final protocol triggered. And while the galaxy celebrated human extinction, Earth remained cold, still, quiet, not panicked, not broken, not begging, just waiting, waiting with a silence that did not feel defeated but dangerous. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. The kind of silence that comes from a species that had been preparing for something far worse than war. Preparing for the day someone would push too far. The day someone would burn a world full of innocence. The day someone would remind humanity what it meant to lose everything. And as Earth's buried machinery hummed to life, as ancient locks released on long-forgotten hangars, as hidden engines rumbled awake beneath ice, beneath oceans, beneath mountains, a truth slowly gathered like thunder in the dark. Humanity had not been peaceful because it was weak. Humanity had been peaceful because it was waiting. And now, with Eden 3 gone, with millions dead, with the last message echoing, "We are unarmed," Earth finally whispered back into the void, not with fear, not with sorrow, but with a cold, rising fury the galaxy had never heard before. The kind of fury that comes from a wound too deep to heal. A fury that would not burn quietly. Humanity was not finished. Humanity was not broken. Humanity was waking up, and the stars would never be the same again. The shock of Eden 3's destruction still hung in the air like a ghost when Earth's highest command hall opened its massive steel doors for the first time in centuries. The floor trembling as silent alarms pulsed through underground levels that no civilian even knew existed, and in that cold, hidden chamber dozens of human officers stood frozen, their faces pale, their eyes hollow, replaying the final transmission from Eden 3 on a giant screen, the trembling voice, the choking breath, the desperate words, "We are civilians, we are unarmed," echoing like a wound across every heart in the room. And no one spoke because there were no words left, only grief so heavy it felt like gravity itself had doubled, and anger so deep it made lungs burn. And as the silence stretched on, the chamber doors slid open again, and a single figure stepped inside, walking slowly, quietly, without any grand entrance. No music, no salute. Just the soft sound of boots on metal, and every officer straightened instinctively because they recognized him. Not from fame, not from speeches, but from the weight he carried in his eyes. The weight of someone who had seen too much darkness, someone who had buried more than he ever spoke about. Admiral Sarin, a man known for calm, known for silence, known for disappearing into the background, someone the galaxy ignored, someone even humans forgot. Because he never sought attention, never demanded rank, never raised his voice, and yet when he stepped into the room, the air changed, tightening with something raw and electric, as if the universe itself leaned closer. He didn't look like a warrior. He didn't look like a legend. He looked tired, his jaw tight, his eyes red around the edges like he hadn't slept in days, and maybe he hadn't, because when he stopped in front of the screen and stared at the burning ruins of Eden 3, a single tear slipped down his cheek, not dramatic, not loud, just a silent drop of grief for millions of voices that would never speak again. And the officers watched him, stunned, because they had never seen him show emotion, never seen him break, and his voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper that trembled with pain. "My daughter lived there." The words hit the room like a shockwave, a punch straight through armor, and several officers lowered their heads, their throats tightening, Because suddenly Eden 3 wasn't just a tragedy. It was personal, brutally personal, and Saren didn't wipe the tear away, didn't hide it. He just stood there, breathing slowly, painfully, like every breath was a fight against a universe that had taken everything from him. And when he turned to face the council table, his voice steadied, low and calm but filled with something dangerously alive, something the galaxy had never heard in a human voice: focused rage. The council stammered, offering apologies, condolences, excuses, their voices tangled with fear and shame, talking about treaties, diplomacy, appeals to the Dravix Dominion. But Saren didn't react, didn't blink, didn't even look at them, and when he finally spoke again, it wasn't loud, it wasn't forceful, it was quiet enough to make the room lean forward. The galaxy thinks we are weak. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white, trembling, not with fear, but with a storm he'd been holding in for years. A storm everyone had mistaken for calm. And he continued, voice cracking just once. They think peace made us small. They think silence made us harmless. Then he stepped forward, placing both hands on the ancient command console at the center of the room. A console locked since before any living human was born. Its surface covered in dust, its screens dark for centuries, and with a slow, shaking breath, he pressed his palm to the biometric seal. A seal no leader had dared to touch. A seal ranked above presidents, above generals, above every known authority, echelon black. For a moment nothing happened, and the officers held their breath, hearts pounding, because everyone knew the legends, everyone knew the rumors. That echelon black was the final command level, a protocol so dangerous, so absolute, that no one believed it was real. And then the console flickered, lights sputtering like old stars waking from a long sleep, screens igniting one by one, machinery rumbling beneath their feet, ancient gears turning deep under the planet's crust, and a voice, cold, mechanical, ancient, echoed through the chamber, identity confirmed. Admiral Saren authorized. Final human protocol unlocked. Gasps rippled through the room, some officers stepping back in fear, others stepping forward in disbelief. Because this wasn't a plan, wasn't a response, wasn't even revenge. It was something older, something prepared generations ago, something humanity had buried beneath oceans and ice and rock, waiting for a day they prayed would never come. And Saren closed his eyes for just a moment, pain flickering across his face as he whispered, barely audible, I wanted peace. I wanted Eden 3 to be the last war we ever remembered. His voice broke, but only for a heartbeat, and when he opened his eyes again, the tears were gone, replaced by a terrifying stillness, the kind of stillness that comes when a soul stops hurting and starts fighting. And he turned to the council, not begging, not asking permission, not waiting for approval, and said 6 words that made every officer freeze, 6 words spoken like a vow carved from grief and fire: activate the final human protocol. The chamber shook violently as massive locks disengaged across Earth's hidden infrastructure, sirens pulsing deep beneath continents, oceans boiling with seismic waves of awakening engines, and across every secret bunker, every frozen vault, every buried hangar, ancient systems roared to life, systems built centuries ago when humanity first entered the stars and realized the truth. Peace was temporary, but extinction could be permanent. And so they had prepared for the unthinkable, not because they wanted war, but because they feared loss. They feared another Eden 3 long before Eden 3 existed. And now, as screens lit up with classified schematics and impossible blueprints, officers stared in shock as the words Silent Fleet appeared across every display, followed by a number so large it made hearts stop. A number no species had ever dared to imagine, and Saren whispered through clenched teeth, voice heavy with grief and fury. They killed civilians. They burned families. They thought we would break. His eyes hardened, burning with a fire that felt almost inhuman. They will learn what humanity becomes when it has nothing left to lose. And in that moment, with Eden 3's ashes still echoing through every soul, humanity changed, not into conquerors, not into monsters, but into something ancient, something unstoppable, something born from pain and forged in silence. And as the first locked hangar beneath Neptune cracked open, releasing a low, thunderous roar into the dark, the galaxy had no idea that the quiet species they mocked, the fragile hearts they ignored, had just awakened a force no empire had ever prepared for. Not revenge, not rage, but a storm 500,000 dreadnoughts strong, rising not from hatred, but from heartbreak. The earth beneath humanity's feet had never felt heavier, never felt more alive, as ancient machines hummed awake in the darkest layers of the planet, vibrations rolling through the crust like distant thunder, and while the surface world continued in stunned silence, unaware of the awakening below, miles under ice, under rock, under oceans, a new heartbeat began. Slow, massive, mechanical, echoing through tunnels carved centuries ago. Tunnels no living human had ever walked. Tunnels built in secret by ancestors who feared a day like this. A day when humanity would be wounded so deeply it would need a strength beyond anything the galaxy believed possible. And as those buried corridors lit up one by one with cold blue light, Admiral Saren stood alone in the central command chamber, staring at the screens that now revealed humanity's greatest truth, a truth hidden so carefully, so painfully, that even he looked shaken, his breath catching in his throat as the holographic feed unfolded before him, showing a colossal hangar beneath Neptune's frozen surface. A hangar so vast it looked like a hollowed-out world, metal platforms stretching for miles, endless rows of titanic silhouettes resting in the shadows, silent giants sleeping in the dark, and the words stamped across every hull made the officers around him go pale. DREADNOUGHT class. Silent Fleet. The young officers could only stare, their voices breaking into whispers of disbelief. This can't be real. Because humanity had never shown this power, never revealed this capability, never even hinted that such a force existed, and yet here it was. An entire fleet hidden from history, hidden from allies, hidden from enemies, hidden from every star that ever thought humans were small. And Saren's jaw tightened as he watched massive steel doors begin to open, releasing waves of frost and fog as the first dreadnought rose slowly from its cradle, its hull gleaming black like a piece of night carved into metal, its engines older than any living memory, but still pulsing with dormant power, and the sight hit Saren's chest like a punch, not with pride, but with grief, because this fleet had been built not for conquest, not for expansion, but for one terrible purpose: extinction insurance. A last promise humanity made to itself in its earliest days among the stars, a promise forged out of fear that someday an enemy would come not for soldiers, but for civilians, not for armies, but for families, and the ancestors who built the silent fleet knew humanity's heart too well. They knew humans would fight hardest not when threatened, but when hurt. Saren's fingers shook as he touched the control console, memories of Eden 3 flickering behind his eyes. Laughing families, peaceful homes, his daughter's voice calling him before she left for the colony, that final message he never answered, and the weight of that loss nearly buckled his knees, but he forced himself upright, breathing through pain that felt like fire in his chest, because he knew this fleet wasn't just metal, wasn't just engines. It was grief frozen into steel, heartbreak turned into machinery, a promise forged in silence that humanity would never again allow itself to be helpless, never again watch civilians die without shielding them. And the officers saw that pain in his eyes, felt it echo in their own hearts, because every human alive had lost someone, somewhere, sometime, and Eden 3 had reopened wounds they thought had healed. As the first dreadnought fully emerged from the ice, towering like a floating mountain, the chamber shook with a deep mechanical roar, engines awakening after generations of silence, and the hangar lights reflected off its armor, revealing ancient markings in faded paint. For the ones we could not save, words so raw, so human, that every officer in the chamber swallowed hard, emotions twisting in their throats. Because this wasn't a fleet built out of arrogance, but out of mourning, built by people who had seen tragedy before, built by hands that shook but still worked, built by hearts that broke but still believed, and Saren whispered, voice barely steady. They built these because they were afraid the galaxy would forget our pain. And then the screens shifted again, showing not one hangar, but dozens, spread across the solar system, hidden beneath frozen moons, drifting inside hollowed asteroids, buried under ocean trenches. Each one opening, each one releasing more dreadnoughts, their engines humming like storm clouds gathering, and the number counter on the screen began to rise, slowly at first, then accelerating faster and faster. 10,000, 40,000, 120,000, 300,000, until the digits blurred with impossible magnitude, and the room fell deathly silent as the final count appeared. 500,000 DRADNOUGHTS online. For a moment no one breathed. No one blinked. The truth was too large, too terrifying, too overwhelming to understand. The galaxy had always believed humans were weak because they were quiet. But that quiet wasn't weakness, it was restraint. It was mercy. It was patience. And now, that silence cracked, and something ancient and unstoppable began to rise inside every human soul. Not hatred, not rage, but a cold, determined ache, a vow that Eden 3 would not be forgotten, that its ashes would not drift unnoticed into the void. Saren's hands trembled as he watched the fleet's formation updates, each dreadnought moving into position with perfect synchronization. A metal wave across the stars, and he whispered to himself, voice breaking, "We never wanted this." His shoulders hunched, his breath shaking, because he knew what unleashing the silent fleet meant. It meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed, a line humanity prayed it would never reach. But Eden 3 had pushed them there, shoved them over the edge, burned away every trace of hesitation. And in that moment he realized the bitter, heartbreaking truth. This wasn't revenge. This was response. A response to a scream the galaxy ignored. That he turned to his officers, tears glistening but eyes turning hard, the softness gone, replaced by a resolve carved from loss. And he spoke in a voice so quiet it felt like thunder in their bones. They burned a colony with no weapons. His fist tightened. We will answer with the weapons they feared we never had. And as the dreadnought fleet rose from the shadows into the cold expanse of space, engines glowing like 500,000 stars, humanity's silence finally broke, not with noise, not with rage, but with the echo of a single truth felt across every beating human heart. Across the galaxy, far from Earth's awakening storm, the Dravix Dominion celebrated in glittering war halls and fortress palaces, their commanders raising crystal glasses filled with dark victory wine, their voices loud with cruel laughter as holograms of Eden 3's ashes played like entertainment on towering screens, and they leaned back in their thrones with smug satisfaction, convinced they had killed the future before it grew, convinced humanity was finished forever, convinced they had erased a species too gentle, too peaceful, too slow to defend itself, and in their arrogance they broadcast their triumph across neighboring star systems, declaring humans extinct, declaring Earth broken, declaring the galaxy cleansed, and they toasted to their own power, boasting that no one, no empire, no council, no fleet, would ever challenge them again, because they believed fear was the greatest weapon, and they believed humanity was too frightened to fight back, too small to rise, too weak to matter. And as the drunken cheers echoed through their chambers, the Dravix High Warlord leaned forward, his forked lips curling into a wicked grin as he spoke the words that made his generals roar with laughter. Let Earth beg. Then we burn it too. They truly believed humans would plead for mercy, would hide in the dark corners of the galaxy, would surrender their pride and kneel like broken animals. And as they broadcast that message across pirate channels and black markets, the galaxy listened and nodded, because every alien empire, every neutral observer, every trader and diplomat had always seen humans as harmless dreamers, explorers, farmers, storytellers, never warriors, never conquerors, never a threat. And when they heard the Dravix declare Eden 3 nothing more than a necessary purge, the galaxy didn't argue. They agreed, they chuckled, they shrugged, because in their minds humans were insignificant, replaceable, forgettable, a species that talked about peace because it didn't have the strength for war, and so planets far beyond Earth turned their heads away, pretending not to care, pretending not to hear the screams beneath the flames of Eden 3, pretending the massacre was justified, and in that silent betrayal, something dark bloomed across the stars, not hatred, but guilt, a quiet unease that slithered into the hearts of those who had once mocked humans, because deep down, buried beneath arrogance, they sensed a wrong had been done, a line crossed, a cruelty too great to ignore, but no one dared speak it aloud, no one dared question the Dravix Dominion, because fear kept their throats closed, because fear made them cowards. But while the galaxy remained passive, entertained, indifferent, the Dravix commanders did not stop at laughter. They began planning their next assault, projecting tactical routes toward Earth, mapping weak points, analyzing human trade routes, mocking the idea that humans could defend themselves, and one strategist, with cold blue eyes, pointed at Earth's position on a star map and sneered, "They have no fleet. They have no army. When we arrive, Earth will fall in an hour." His words were met with cheers, with applause, with celebration, and the room erupted into a frenzy of excitement as they imagined their next victory. Imagined burning Earth the same way they burned Eden 3. Imagined wiping humanity from the universe once and for all. Meanwhile, across neutral worlds, alien crowds gathered around public screens as the Dravix news broadcasts replayed over and over again, showing Eden 3's final transmission. The broken voice whispering, "We are unarmed," and laughter rippled through some markets, pity through a few, but mostly silence, cold silence, because no one expected humans to rise, no one expected humans to fight, no one expected humans to do anything at all. And even those who felt sympathy shook their heads and whispered, "Humans can't win. They have nothing." But that belief began to crack the moment a strange, faint distortion swept across long-range scanners, an anomaly so massive, so unnatural, that entire space stations paused mid-rotation, their systems glitching for a split second, and navigators frowned, confused, tapping their screens as readings flickered with impossible data, gravitational shifts, energy spikes, sensor interference. And though the distortion vanished just as quickly as it appeared, it left behind a ghost reading, a ghost shadow, a ghost shape, something enormous moving across the dark, something far too large to be a fleet, something that made even the bravest captains feel a chill run down their spines. And whispers began spreading in secret, quiet places, whispers that carried fear, something is coming. But the Dravix ignored the signs. They dismissed the anomaly as a glitch, laughed at the rumors, and continued their celebrations, slamming their fists on tables, boasting loudly, "Humans are dead. Let the galaxy bow to us." They were so blinded by pride that they didn't notice how the stars outside their war windows seemed darker than before, how the void felt heavier, how the silence between the stars seemed deeper, as if the universe itself was waiting, holding its breath, preparing for something they could not see, something they could not imagine. And while the Dravix laughed, Earth did not laugh. Earth did not celebrate. Earth did not scream. Earth stayed silent, cold, steady, unshaking, because humanity knew something the galaxy didn't, something the Dravix would soon learn in the most terrifying way possible. Silence was not surrender. Silence was preparation, far away from the cheering war halls, in the drifting emptiness of deep space. The first wave of dreadnoughts moved like shadows across the void, engines dim and silent, their colossal hulls reflecting starlight like black mirrors, 500,000 giants advancing in perfect, wordless formation, unstoppable, unbreakable, unseen. Humanity was not begging. The Dravix Dominion's arrogance shattered in a single heartbeat the moment their long-range scanners detected something they had never seen before, a reading so massive and so dense that alarms cut through every war hall, wiping the laughter from their throats, and commanders leaned over consoles with narrowed eyes, expecting a small human rescue fleet, maybe a handful of desperate ships, something weak, something predictable. But as the data sharpened, as the blur turned into shape, their faces drained of color, their spines stiffening with a fear so cold it felt like ice in their veins, because the scanners weren't picking up a fleet of dozens, or hundreds, or even thousands. It was detecting a wall of signatures stretching across the stars, a formation so wide it blotted out half the sector, and the technicians, trembling, stuttered through the numbers, unable to believe what the systems were screaming into their ears. 500,000 Dreadnought-class vessels. For a moment, no one spoke, no one breathed, the war hall suffocating under the weight of impossible truth, and the High Warlord staggered back a single step, his claws clenching around the edge of the table as his voice cracked. No species could build that. No species could hide that. But the data didn't change, didn't glitch, didn't flicker, it only grew clearer, showing ranks upon ranks of colossal human warships moving in perfect silence through the void, each one bigger than the Dravix capital fortress, each one armed with weapons the scanners couldn't identify, each one displaying the same cold, emotionless designation, TSF-DIDNOUGHT, and dread sank into every Dravix heart as they realized the horrifying truth. Humanity hadn't been unprepared, humanity hadn't been weak, humanity hadn't been slow, humanity had been silent. Across neutral planets, public screens flickered as emergency broadcasts cut through daily life, showing blurry footage of something dark and endless moving through space like a tidal wave of metal. And aliens who once laughed at humans felt their stomachs twist as analysts whispered shaky words. This fleet violates every known law of production. This fleet should be impossible, and crowds froze, eyes wide, because they finally felt it. The shift, the turning of fate, the moment the universe stopped underestimating humanity. Meanwhile, in Dravik's command decks, fresh panic erupted, officers shouting conflicting orders, some demanding retreat, some demanding attack, some begging for confirmation, and the High Warlord slammed his fist on the console, roaring, "It's intimidation. They won't fire." But even he heard the crack of fear in his own voice, because as the holo display zoomed in, revealing the leading dreadnought, a monstrous behemoth of armored steel and silent engines, something became painfully clear. The human ships weren't slowing down, weren't signaling, weren't negotiating. They were advancing with a calm, terrifying inevitability, as though nothing in existence could stand in their way. And deep within the Dravik's flagship, a young officer whispered the words that sent a chill through every soul in the room. They didn't build this overnight. They planned this for centuries. And suddenly the Draviks understood the cruelest truth of all. They hadn't just attacked a colony, they had awakened a civilization that had been preparing for the unthinkable. A species that had buried its pain in steel, its fear in engines, its grief in 500,000 warships, and the Draviks, shaking, finally saw Eden 3 for what it truly was, not a victory, but a mistake. A spark thrown at a sleeping volcano. Outside their windows, the stars darkened as the first line of dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace, their massive hulls forming a horizon of metal that stretched farther than any Draviks I could see, and the silence was unbearable, louder than explosions, louder than sirens, louder than screams, because the humans hadn't sent a warning, hadn't sent a threat, hadn't sent a plea. They had sent an answer, and that answer was approaching, steady, unstoppable, relentless. The High Warlord tried to speak, tried to order weapons primed, but the words caught in his throat when the central dreadnought's armor plating shifted, revealing a single phrase etched into its side in bold, ancient Terran letters, "For Eden 3, and something inside every Dravik's soldier broke, because they finally understood, the humans weren't coming for conquest. They weren't coming for territory. They weren't coming for power. They were coming for justice, and as those 500,000 dreadnoughts continued forward in perfect formation, engines glowing like a second dawn rising across the void, the galaxy felt its heart seize in collective terror, because humanity hadn't raised its voice in anger, hadn't screamed its pain, hadn't shown its strength, not until now, and this silent storm of steel spoke louder than any words ever could. The Dravik's Dominion had always believed that fear was loud, that power roared, that domination screamed through space like thunder, but as the 500,000 human dreadnoughts drifted closer in perfect, wordless formation, they learned a truth that crushed the breath from their lungs. Real fear was silent, real power didn't need to shout, and the quiet advance of that metal horizon felt like the universe itself was holding still, watching, waiting, trembling. And inside the Dravik's command citadel panic rippled like wildfire, officers slamming their claws against consoles, issuing desperate commands, voices cracking as they screamed for weapons to charge, shields to raise, reinforcements to mobilize. But every order sounded small, hollow, pointless, because no matter how many systems they activated, no matter how many ships they scrambled, the human fleet kept coming, unstoppable, unhurried, unchanging, like a storm that had already decided the ending long before it arrived, and in the center of the dreadnought wall the flagship loomed larger than the rest. A colossal vessel with armor plates like mountains and engines burning with a cold blue glow, and aboard that ship stood Admiral Saren, staring at the holo display with eyes that held no triumph, no pride, only a deep, aching sorrow buried beneath iron resolve. A sorrow so heavy it pulled at his shoulders, tightened his breath, hollowed his voice when he finally spoke. "Open a channel," and the communications officers hesitated, expecting a threat, expecting rage, expecting fury. But when the transmission connected and Saren's face appeared on every Dravik screen across their empire, his voice was soft, too soft, a quiet whisper that shook them more than shouting ever could. "You killed civilians." Those 3 words struck harder than any cannon blast, because there was no hate in them, no rage, only grief so raw it felt like a wound pressed against every Dravik's heart. And Saren continued, voice trembling just once. "You burned children, families, farmers, teachers, people who never touched a weapon." The Dravik's War Council stared in stunned silence, their throats tight, their bravado crumbling, because no alien leader had ever spoken to them like this. Not with threats, but with truth, and Saren's eyes glistened, just faintly, as he whispered the line that echoed across every ship, every world, every soul. We asked for peace. You answered with fire. For a moment, the universe felt painfully small, as if all the stars had dimmed to listen, as if the memory of Eden 3 hovered in the air like smoke. And then Saren's voice hardened, the sorrow sharpening into something lethal, something cold and resolute. Humanity does not rage. Humanity does not beg. Humanity remembers. On the Dravix flagship, the High Warlord lunged forward, slamming a fist onto the table, screaming, "Attack them! Now!" But his voice cracked, trembling with fear so stark his own soldiers stepped back, because they saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't commanding. He was panicking, and as Dravix warships powered their cannons and locked targets on the leading dreadnoughts, something horrifying happened. Not a blast, not a shield, not a barrage, nothing. The human fleet did not fire, did not flinch, did not respond. They simply held position, engines glowing softly like a heartbeat pulsing through the void, and that silence, that unbearable, suffocating silence, shredded the Dravix morale far more than any weapon could, because it felt like judgment, like the humans were giving them one final chance to understand the weight of what they had done. And the young Dravix officers felt their claws tremble as their screens flickered with raw footage from Eden 3. Families running, flames rising, the final message. We are unarmed, and for the first time in their violent history, some of them felt shame, real shame, a burning ache in their chests that made them swallow hard and look away. Then, slowly, deliberately, Admiral Saren leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper so quiet it felt like a chill sliding across every Dravix spine. You thought our silence meant weakness. His eyes darkened, tears drying into something fierce, something unbreakable. Our silence meant mourning. And as that truth sank into the bones of an entire empire, as millions of Dravix soldiers realized what they had awakened, Saren spoke the final message, the sentence that would be remembered across galaxies for eternity. We did not come to negotiate. We came to answer. At that exact moment, the human fleet's engines surged, the blue glow intensifying until space itself seemed to pulse with their power, and the command decks across the Dravix Empire erupted in terrified screams as energy readings spiked beyond measurable limits. Weapons so massive they broke every chart, every scale, every expectation, and the High Warlord collapsed into his throne, his voice a broken whisper, "This cannot be real." But it was real, painfully, terrifyingly real, because humanity, the quiet species everyone dismissed, the dreamers everyone mocked, the peaceful hearts everyone underestimated, had revealed their final, devastating truth. They had not built a fleet to conquer worlds. They had built a fleet to make sure no one ever burned. Another Eden 3 again, and as the dreadnoughts shifted formation, towering like gods of steel over the trembling Dravix armada, the galaxy felt something it had never felt before, not horror, not anger, but awe, a trembling awe that came from witnessing a species whose strength was not born from hatred, but from heartbreak, a species that did not rise because it wanted power, but because it could no longer bear loss. And that truth echoed across the stars like a pulse of destiny, silent but undeniable. The moment Admiral Saren's final words faded into the silent void, time itself seemed to hold still, the stars frozen like witnesses to a truth too heavy to ignore, and on the Dravix flagship every soldier stared at their screens with wide, shaking eyes, breaths shallow, hearts pounding with a terror they had never known, because the human fleet didn't move like an army preparing for battle. It moved like a verdict, like a sentence written long before this moment. And as the dreadnought formations shifted with flawless precision, aligning into a massive spearhead that stretched across the black horizon, the Dravix War Council felt their bones tighten with dread, because they finally understood that nothing they said, nothing they offered, nothing they begged would change what was coming, and the High Warlord, who minutes ago had laughed at humanity's suffering, now clutched the armrests of his throne so hard his claws cracked the metal, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Fire everything." But even as the order left his mouth, every Dravix gun, every cannon, every missile bay unleashed its might in a blinding storm of energy, a tidal wave of destruction meant to erase the humans before they could strike, and the void lit up with violent light, plasma ripping through space like falling stars, detonations blooming across the battlefield in colors so bright they turned the darkness into a false dawn, and yet, when the glare faded, the Dravix froze in disbelief. The human fleet still stood untouched. 500,000 dreadnoughts shimmering behind shields so powerful the Dravix weapons might as well have been sparks against a mountain, and a suffocating silence followed, not the silence of strategy, but the silence of despair, the kind that crushes the lungs and hollows the soul, and young Dravix officers sank into their seats, tears burning their eyes as they whispered shaky words they never imagined voicing, "We cannot win." Because they knew now that they weren't facing an enemy, they were facing consequence. Then, without warning, the lead dreadnought lowered its colossal cannons, metal shifting with a deep, thunderous groan that reverberated through every sensor, every screen, every fragile heart listening, and Admiral Saren stood on the command bridge with his hands resting heavily on the rail, eyes filled not with fury, but with a grief so sharp it felt like a blade, grief for Eden 3, grief for the voices silenced beneath smoke, grief for the daughter whose last words he would never hear, and when he spoke, it wasn't a roar, it wasn't a threat, it was a whisper of pure heartbreak, for every innocent life you burned. And the orders echoed through every dreadnought, a soft chime like a funeral bell, target only Dravix military assets. Because humanity wasn't here to slaughter. Humanity wasn't here to become the monster. Humanity was here to end one. And then the first human cannon fired. There was no scream, no spectacle, no chaos, just a beam of white light so controlled, so precise, that it erased an entire Dravix battle group in a single, silent flash, their ships disappearing as if they had never existed, and the shockwave rippled through Dravix channels, officers collapsing to their knees in disbelief. And before they could even process the loss, the second human volley launched, another clean, surgical strike, erasers of war, destroyers of fleets, but sparing every civilian planet, every non-military zone, every innocent life within Dominion space, and that clemency hurt the Dravix more than destruction, because they realized the humans weren't driven by vengeance. They were driven by justice, and justice was merciless only to the guilty. Panic erupted across the Dravix armada, ships turning to flee, commanders screaming for retreat, crying out prayers to gods they never believed in before, but it was too late, because the human fleet moved like a tide, sweeping through the battlefield with terrifying grace, each dreadnought firing once, then moving on, never wasting a shot, never striking twice, never missing, and with every precise elimination, the Dravix empire shrank, their power collapsing like sand washed away by a rising sea, and soldiers who once chanted war songs now sobbed into their helmets, realizing that the species they mocked, the species they underestimated, the species they burned had become something unstoppable, not because they wanted domination, but because they refused to let Eden 3 happen again. On the flagship, the High Warlord watched in horror as red symbols, representing destroyed fleets, filled his tactical screen one after another, faster and faster, until the entire map turned crimson, his voice shattering into a broken gasp. We started this. And for the first time in his brutal life, he felt shame, raw and unbearable, because the truth was undeniable. They hadn't provoked a war, they had provoked a reckoning. And as the human fleet closed in, surrounding the flagship like giants encircling a dying flame, the warlord fell to his knees, not from impact, not from defeat, but from the crushing weight of regret, the realization that his pride had doomed an empire. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, Saren watched the battlefield with hollow eyes, his heart pounding with grief instead of triumph, because every blast reminded him of a world he could never restore, a daughter he could never hold again. And when the final Dravix battleship fell into silence, when the last enemy weapon powered down, he whispered through a trembling breath, "Eden 3, this is for you." And with those words, the surviving Dravix soldiers surrendered, their weapons dropping, their voices shaking with a plea that echoed across space, "We yield." Humanity didn't cheer, humanity didn't celebrate, humanity simply stood in the silence of victory, a silence heavy with tears, heavy with memory, heavy with the truth that justice always costs something, and the galaxy watched in stunned, trembling awe, realizing that they had never feared humans because humans were weak. They feared what humans might become if they were ever broken, and now they had seen it. 500,000 dreadnoughts. A fleet born from ashes. A species that rose not out of rage, but out of love for the ones they lost. When the final Dravik's weapon fell silent and the battlefield dimmed into a cold, trembling quiet, the galaxy expected thunder, expected flames, expected humanity to sweep forward and claim worlds, conquer empires, demand surrender from every species that had once mocked them. But instead the 500,000 dreadnoughts simply held their positions, unmoving. Engines humming like distant heartbeats, their massive shadows stretching across the stars like monuments carved from grief, and aboard every alien station, every neutral world, every listening outpost, billions watched the feeds with wide, breathless eyes, waiting for the moment humanity would seize control, waiting for the moment the new rulers of the galaxy would speak. But no declaration came, no anthem, no roar of triumph, only a silence so deep it felt like the universe itself was paused between heartbeats. And on the Dravik's flagship, the High Warlord lay collapsed on the floor, trembling, defeated, whispering broken apologies to a species he once considered beneath him, his claws stained with the weight of his own pride, his voice barely audible as he choked. We never thought they would rise, and for the first time in their history, the Draviks understood what true power looked like, power that did not crave glory, power that did not shout, power that stood unshakable in quiet resolve. Then, slowly, the massive screen aboard the flagship flickered to life again, and the image of Admiral Saren appeared, not towering, not triumphant, but weary, his eyes shadowed with sleepless grief, the weight of Eden III still carved into every line of his face, and every Dravik soldier, every alien viewer felt their chest tighten as they realized the terrible, beautiful truth. He had not won anything today, he had only prevented more loss, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than ever. Fragile enough to break, this ends here. Not a threat, not a warning, a promise. And then, with a slow exhale that sounded like letting go of a lifetime of pain, he added, "We will not take your worlds. We will not burn your cities. We are not here to become what you were." The Draviks stared in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend mercy in the face of such power, unable to understand why humanity, who had every chance to crush them entirely, would choose restraint instead of domination, and some fell to their knees, not out of fear this time, but out of a shame so heavy it made their bones ache. Across the galaxy, alien leaders leaned closer to their screens, their voices trembling with shock as one whispered, "Humans, they had every reason to destroy us all," and another answered, barely breathing, "But they didn't." And in that moment, the universe learned something it had never understood, that the greatest danger was not a species driven by rage, but a species driven by love so fierce it would build 500,000 dreadnoughts to protect it, and yet refused to use that power for conquest. Admiral Saren turned slightly, his gaze drifting to the silent void where Eden III once lived, his voice breaking just once as he whispered, "We will never forget our dead." His hand curled into a fist, not with anger, but with promise, and then he spoke the line that would be carved into history forever. Humanity does not start wars. Humanity ends them. The words echoed through every channel, every ship, every world, and even the stars seemed to hold their light a moment longer, honoring the truth. Then, without fanfare, without celebration, without a single shot fired in victory, the human fleet began to move, not forward into enemy territory, but away, pulling back in flawless formation, turning their colossal hulls toward the dark frontier beyond mapped space, engines igniting in a synchronized bloom of cold blue fire, and officers across the galaxy stared in disbelief as the dreadnoughts vanished, one by one, into the distant void, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a second dawn, a silence that whispered not threat, but warning. Humanity had shown its strength, but it had chosen its heart. On the Dravik's homeworld, civilians emerged from bunkers, looking up at the sky with trembling eyes, expecting fire, expecting destruction, but seeing nothing, just a calm, empty horizon and the faint echo of the words humanity left behind like a scar across time. Back on Earth, when Admiral Saren stood alone in the dim war chamber, the weight of what had happened pressed into him so sharply he had to brace himself against the console. His breaths uneven, tears finally falling, not for victory, but for Eden III, for the daughter whose voice he would never hear again, for the millions who would never come home. And in that quiet, private moment, away from the eyes of the galaxy, he whispered through shaking lips, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." His voice cracked, his shoulders trembled, but even in his grief he knew this truth. He had saved countless others from becoming another Eden 3. He had ended the cycle before it could swallow more innocent lives, and he had given humanity something greater than vengeance. He had given them dignity as the Dreadnoughts disappeared beyond known space. Alien scholars and war councils whispered in or in terror, "Where are they going?" And no one had an answer, but deep within the classified archives of Earth Command, a final encrypted message pulsed to life, visible only to those with the highest clearance. 10 simple words glowing like a heartbeat in the dark. We prepare not for war, but for what comes next. And somewhere, far beyond the edge of familiar stars, 500,000 dreadnoughts sailed through the void like silent guardians. A steel promise carved into infinity, a warning no empire would ever forget.